retired bishop, Bishop Bowen, has a brother who's a bishop, so so Hartmeyer needs to get a brother. You know. Well, welcome to the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. My name is Pete Conley. I'm one of the volunteer docents here. I'm not sure what you know about the Georgia itself. And when General Oglethorpe founded the county back in 1733, he banned both Catholics and Jews from the county, and originally weren't allowed to be here. Except about a week after he got here, a boatload of Jewish settlers arrived, and they had a doctor with them. So he said, never mind about that no Jewish people thing. So he down in Monterey Square is the third oldest Jewish community in the country after Rhode Island and New York, and a Gothic synagogue, which is really a beautiful building. But the ban on Catholics lasted until about 1785, and that's when Catholics could say they were here and build a church. So the first church on 1795 was at the end of Liberty Street, a little wooden church, and about 1839 it got large enough they built a brick church actually right over here where the Perry Lane Hotel is now. That was the original cathedral, and you'll see Bishop Parks, the chancellery in front of where the original cathedral, that came to the diocese in 1850, so that was the original cathedral building over there, and the chancellery is still in front of where the original cathedral building was. So they started building this in 1873. They were using both of them. They were using this through the 1880s, but they still had the original cathedral. So they didn't consider it finished until 1896 when the twin spires were put on and the residence was built and was finally finished. Again, this is a typical French Gothic cathedral. The first priests here were French from Haiti. We had a lot of French come over back then. They were fleeing the French Revolution, plus the big slave revolt in Haiti, and the French had to leave there awfully quick. So they went to Savannah and they went to New Orleans, and they came here. Father Lemoyne, who was the one who started the first church in Georgia, Locust Grove, about a
cemetery, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a cemetery something.
He's in the cemetery over here.
Yeah.
Father Lemoyne, his grave is over there. He was the first one, but the first one in Savannah was 1795. Typical French Gothic. So since the priests were European, you see a lot of European in here. All the stained glass in the cathedral is from Innsbruck, Austria. The Austrians have always been the best glassmakers in the cathedral, in the building. My wife's church, she belongs to the Lutheran Church on Wright Square, and all the stained, and that's a lot older than this church, of course, because the Salzburgers came 1740 or so, and all the stained glass there is from Innsbruck, Austria, too. The altar, of course, the altars in the side chapels, the chapel goes to the Sacred Heart, and you'll see all the stained glass in there pertains to the Sacred Heart, and the altar in Mary's chapel and all the stained glass pertains to Mary in there. Those are all carved in Munich, Germany. That copy of Michelangelo's Pietà, the original ones in the Vatican, the full-size one, that was carved in Florence, Italy, 1856. Dominic Manelli was the artist that did that, a beautiful piece. That was back in the rectory for about 50 years, until the pandemic. We closed down for a couple weeks. We had enough people to help move it out of the rectory in front of Mary's altar where it should have been. It weighs 1,000 pounds. So,
Wow.
So it's staying right there. All the paintings in the cathedral are oil on canvas. An artist in they did some of the murals in the Library of Congress, Paul Gashecki. These are done in his Manhattan studio. They're all put on like wallpaper, but they're all oil on canvas paintings. Some beautiful renditions. And of course, Gothic churches, the original reason for Gothic churches, the Gothic period started about the 12th century. And actually, the term Gothic was an insult by the Renaissance people. They want to go back to the classic Greek and Roman architectural style, and they thought this was vulgar, having all these statues and that. So they called it Gothic. They made it the Goths, who were the barbarians back then. It really should have been called High French. So this is a French Gothic cathedral. The other thing that's really, I think, the highlight, the most important part of the cathedral as far as the decorations go, are the Stations of the Cross. The Stations of the Cross are all wood carvings, hand carved from wood in Bavaria. And the outer case is American walnut, but each station is carved from one block of wood, like a carve a block of marble. But the ability of these artists to get the emotions out of a piece of wood, to me, is the highlight. The two at the end where Jesus is taken down from the cross, the arms of his mother, the sorrow on those people's faces, it almost grabs you when you walk by. It's just really a powerful Stations of the Cross. I think that's really the irreplaceable highlight of it back then. Of course, where the red lanterns hang, and that's where the Blessed Sacrament's kept back in the Chapel of the Sacred Heart. And the lighting departments there, when when Vatican II happens and you have all these extra tabernacles, so those are the 3 extra tabernacles on the other altars, and now that's the ambry where the holy oils are. Baptism and confirmation and sickness, the oils are kept back then. And over in the corner, something a lot of Catholics don't recognize, it's called the confessional. Yeah, but it's a beautiful, it tells the story of the prodigal son. The one panel is the desert, the middle panel is the prodigal son, and the final panel is a tree of life going through the reconciliation process. So that's a beautiful piece. The crucifix over on St. Anthony's altar, that was carved in Italy also, a beautiful piece. And everybody's favorite saint, St. Anthony, we had a statue and an altar for him over there. So we want to be a Gothic church unless we had a great rose window. So of course in back of you see our great rose window. Just like Notre Dame has 3 of those. And we put St. Cecilia in the middle because, of course, she's the patron saint of music. So she can keep an eye on the choir for us over there. If they mess up, she's going to get about it. But that is a 3,000 pipe organ. It's a real pipe organ. It's not electronic, it's a real pipe organ. 3,000 pipes. And we have about a 30-person choir. But the big difference is all these pillars, they're just painted to look like marble. They're really cast iron. They're not marble.
Oh,
Yeah, if they were marble, they'd have to be this thick to crack them or low. So when the organ plays and the choir sings, the music bounces off the cast iron. It just swirls to the church.
Circle.
Does it help?
When they do the Gloria and hit that last note and stop, it just floats for 6 seconds through the church.
So that's enhance the
It's
sound.
like a concert hall. And especially Latin music, Gregorian chant, that's magical in here. It's just the old monasteries. It's really a haunting sound.
Did they meant like that for when they
I don't
the
know.
construction?
I don't know. They considered it finished 1896, and then 2 years later there was a fire in the cathedral. Actually, a small fire started underneath where that front altar was. At the same time, there was a big fire at one of the cotton factories in the river. By the time they got here, there was no water pressure left. They said the hose wagons pulled up across the street, and the water came about halfway across and just died because there was no water pressure.
Wow.
So just thousands of people lining the streets watching the cathedral burn, and there was nothing they could do about it. This is what the church looked like just before the fire. Pretty much like it does now, pretty French Gothic. And that was after the fire. You can kind of see.
Sau khi bị cháy.
So, but the outer walls were still surviving. So these original outer walls, including the twin spires, they survived the fire. The back altar is the back altar that survived the fire, 1870. And there are 2 windows that you have to look at them later. The windows there's one window to the left of that pillar where you can look at the stained glass and you can tell it's a lot older than the new glass. The new glass is from 1899. That's from 1870. And one of the things survived, that painting of Our Lady of Good Counsel. They found that in the basement about 8 years ago.
Wow. 8 years ago.
8 years ago, and somebody said, wait a second, that was from before the fire. That was on Mary's altar there. So she's been in our basement since 1898. So our Catholic women's group had her, the painting over there. So our Catholic women's group had her cleaned up, and she's back where she belongs. So that's
Did they know the cause of the fire?
There was, the heating system was underneath that, in the basement underneath that. Because, when they built the church back in 1873, they built a chapel in the basement because there's no air conditioning. So after Easter, they'd moved down to the basement chapel. And then in October, they moved back up here because it got cooler. So that probably started underneath there. The big problem was the big fire at the cotton factory where there was no water pressure left to fight this fire. So it only took 3 years to rebuild because the walls were still standing. So the stained glass in the Station of the Cross are from 1899. The murals took to about 1910 or so, a little later to do that. So this is the church you're looking at now here, back then. But it's typical French Gothic. The fact they didn't teach people how to read back in the 12th century meant you put the Bible on the walls for people to teach with back then, which is why. But it's really, I think, one of the most interesting things about Gothic churches is if you paint a person, the person had to be able to tell you who they are, because you can't put a sign.
They can read it, but that's not.
So they got to give you, everything is symbolic. So that's why St. Cecilia, middle of great rose window, she's holding a little harp in her hand, so people see the harp and they'd say, music, that's got to be St. Cecilia. Way up is the the Old Testament, Old
Yeah.
Prophet
Yeah.
Testament. You can see
Amen.
Moses.
Yeah.
Did you? I have to admit, I went through Catholic schools my whole life. I'd never heard of Saint Denis until I started volunteering here.
Saint Denis.
Saint Denis. According to his story, he was a priest in Paris. They told him, preacher, they cut off his head. But you have to remember how long those stories are and how
He
things.
carried his head here.
That's
yeah.
it. So he wanted. So they finally wanted to start. They cut it, but then he said he picked his head up and kept preaching. So,
yeah.
so if you look at that first one on the aisle, way up there,
Uh-huh.
in the aisle down there,
Yes.
you see the empty halo and the guy in the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah.
This one over here, on the aisle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
See the empty. He's
Yep,
holding his
yep,
head in his
yep,
hands.
yep, yep.
So if you knew his story, you would know that's got to be Saint Denis. He's telling you who he is because he's holding his head. So yeah.
Ông cầm cái đầu, ông ôm cái đầu của ông đang còn giảng đạo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
Saint
Saint
Denis.
Denis here. I took the
Ở đây, hình
like
thứ
picture
nhất
too.
cái đầu
Yeah. He just carry his head like this and preach for
Yeah.
different
Người ta
friends.
chặt đầu ông rồi mà ông cầm cái đầu của ông đang còn
The
giảng.
Cathedral of Saint Denis in Paris is where
Yeah,
it
yes,
is.
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Saint Agnes is up there holding a little lamb in her hand. Of course,
Yeah.
it's Agnes Dei, the Lamb of God. So
Yeah.
people would tell her. Joan of Arc is up there wearing chainmail and carrying a sword. So everybody will tell you who they are
Yes.
if you know their story.
Yep.
So it's a very interesting church to go through and look at.
Like I told you before, that he just told me that next year he'll be a main celebrant for the weddings here.
Oh,
at his
really? Oh,
cathedral.
great.
Yes, in May,
Oh.
May 21st.
Oh, you're gonna be busy. There are weddings 2 every weekend
Yeah.
here, from May all the way through to.
Right, yes.
I know there was one last Saturday, and there's this place decorated for weddings and Christmas is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Really beautiful.
How's the sound system like
Oh,
when they turn on? Is there echo problems or?
No. They've worked a lot of years on the sound system, especially when our new music director came in, Dr. Hartmeyer, Dr. Thornberry came in. He did a wonderful job. In fact, we're having a Mozart concert this Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah, our 30-person choir, 29 musicians from the Savannah Philharmonic Orchestra, and there's 8 professional singers that are our section heads. They'll all be on the altar up here for our Mozart, about an hour and a half Mozart concert on Sunday. But we still live stream our Sunday service, so if you want to see a service, just actually there's 4 cameras that show you a lot of the church too, including one way up in a pillar there, so you get to see the choir and the organist. If you come to church, you only see the neck up. If you stay home and watch it, like happy hour or something, you get to see more of the church than the organist than you do if you come to church. But it's just a beautiful sound. It's a wonderful church. To be able to worship in a place like this is just really just wonderful thing.
Yeah. Also, do you have any information about the cemetery that we just walked by?
That was
next door?
a cemetery from 1750 to 1850.
Okay.
There's a lot of there's a lot of colonial times there. There's people from. It's really before the Civil War ended. So it's this Revolutionary War. One of the signers of the Declaration of Independence for Georgia, Button Gwinnett, is planted there. The ground right in front of there is where the old dueling grounds in colonial times. It was illegal to duel in city limits, so the cemetery was the end of the city back then in the 1850s. So they came there to duels of honor, to shoot each other there. And Button Gwinnett and General McClish both shot each other back then. And I live right across the street, so all the ghost tours go back behind my house and talk about that. They always talk about they were buried a pistol shot apart in the cemetery. So the guy that the first steamship across the Atlantic, he's buried there. It's a lot of the old colonial stuff back then. It's a beautiful cemetery. It's not as beautiful as Bonaventure Cemetery, which is a gorgeous cemetery. That's out. You have to actually drive out there. That's, if you ever read Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, that's the Garden of Good and Evil right there, the cemetery. But especially during May when you're here, the azaleas just fill the whole cemetery. It's just the most beautiful spot in Savannah.
Yeah. Why the tomb is so huge? Is that one person tomb or
Families.
a family?
Yeah, and when General Sherman invaded the city and took it over, the Confederate Army had left already. They went across the Savannah River down to Columbia and down to Charleston. So when Sherman came here, he didn't burn the city. It was also pleasant. There was like 150,000 bales of cotton here that he didn't want to burn up either, save for the Union Army. So he didn't burn the city, but he stabled his soldiers and their horses in the cemetery there. So you'll see a wall down there, and those are graves that were just broken off, and they didn't know where they went, so they put them on the wall there. But what they did is they dug up some of these tombs and threw the bodies out, and they got in them for warmth back then. And they changed some of the stuff on the outside of it, the writings, so where some people died before they were born. You know, some people lived 200 years. You know, to change the beginning, ending, birth dates. Then, so they did a lot of mischief in there. But that's so it's really they don't preserve it. They don't let people take rubbings of it. So it's tough to tell which are there. But nobody's been buried there since 1850.
Okay.
And probably that's not the whole cemetery. It probably extends under Abercorn Street there, but they never moved the bodies there. There's another big cemetery over on the west side. Where
What's the name of it? What's they called?
Oh, that's called the Colonial Cemetery.
The Colonial
Yeah, Colonial Cemetery Park. Yeah, that'd be one of the squares out there.
Thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're
thanks,
welcome,
sir.
Father. It's
Thank you.
a pleasure.
Thank you.
It's my church. I love to show it off.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
And you have to do something between happy hours when you retire.
We didn't know we have the chance. There was the opportunity for you to.
Oh,
get to
good.
hear
Yeah.
from you.
Nice. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Last time we came and then we didn't have any information.
Hỏi ông coi cái xin số điện thoại của ông tôi gửi cái clip cho ông lâu lâu mới được. Ông thích
Oh,
không?
he said he took the little videos. You want to send it to you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He
some
said
point.
get the phone number so he can send the video that
Yeah.
you just recorded. Send it to you.
Okay.
You give me your phone number. I will put on my note here so I can give it to
In
him.
fact, I'll just give you a card.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. You got your
Yeah.
your
will
cell
send you.
phone in there.
Yeah.
He'll send the video.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause I used to teach information technology
Có số điện thoại
at
không?
the university, but history is so much more
Your
fascinating.
cell phone in here?
than
Your
that.
cell phone? Your
Yep.
cell phone?
Your cell phone in here?
Yes, it's 912.
Cell phone.
Yeah, mine. That's mine. That's my wife, Peter.
Okay.
912.
Peter. Okay.
Yep.
Có không? Có không?
Oh, good. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Yeah.
it. That's great.
All right.
Maybe
Peter.
tomorrow.
Thank you.